By now, you know that floating an element takes the element out of the normal document flow. When you float elements left or right in a container, the parent container's height collapses because it no longer honors the space of the floated elements inside it. Now, you may not notice any problem at all if the parent container doesn't have a background color, image, or border. In this lesson, you'll learn why it's always important to be aware of collapsing containers when using floats. In our layout, the collapsed parent container is the header. It has a background color, so we're able to see that the browser does not account for the height of the floated name element and the navigation. A parent container with floated elements may not always collapse to no height at all. If the container includes a padding value or a height value, it'll have some visible height. So, for example, the header in our layout isn't collapsing entirely because of the 1.5m top and bottom padding values applied to main header. So it still honors those padding values. But if the header had no padding whatsoever, the header's height collapses to 0 height. I want to open up the collapse space around the floated header elements. Now, I could force the header's height to expand by giving it a fixed height. So for instance, in the main header rule, I can say height 110 pixels. And when we take a look at it again, we can see that the background color shows up again. Now, this may be good enough to help you in a pinch, or you can use this on small projects with really simple header layouts like this one. However, applying a fixed height to a container isn't a flexible solution, especially when you're dealing with elements that have varying heights, like columns, which you'll learn more about later. So I'll go back and remove the height value from the main header rule. So there are a few simple and more flexible ways to force a collapsed element to expand to the full height of its floated child elements. One way is setting the parent element's overflow value to hidden or auto. The next way is clearing the floats with a CSS pseudo element. So if I go back to the main header rule and add a overflow property and set the value to either auto or hidden, I'll use the value hidden, we can see how it fixes the collapsing issue by forcing the header to expand and contain the floated elements. This will do the trick, and depending on your layout, it may be all you need to do. But the overflow property isn't specifically for floats. The value hidden can hide content that shouldn't be hidden, and the value auto can trigger unwanted scroll bars. So for example, you may have a drop-down menu in one of the navigation items, and if the drop-down has content that expands below the header, that content will not show up and appear to be cut off. So the most popular and most ideal method web designers and developers use for containing floats is called a clear fix. This clever method uses a CSS pseudo element to force a container to clear its floated children so that it doesn't collapse, no matter how many floats it contains. Back in my style sheet, I'm going to scroll down to the media query, and inside the media query, all the way at the bottom, I'm going to create a new rule with the class clearfix. And I'll append an after pseudo element to the selector. So after the clearfix class, I'll type 2 colons followed by after. You can use any class name you want as the clearfix. Group, clear, or CF are also common class names web designers use when writing clearfixes. And the double colon in the selector means that this is a pseudo element. And you can learn a whole lot more about pseudo elements by checking out the links in the teacher's notes of this video. Inside this rule, I'm going to type the content property and set the value to an empty set of quotes. Now, the clearfix rule uses the content property to generate a blank pseudo element after an element from within the CSS. The pseudo element appears in the page as would a real HTML element. In other words, it creates an empty virtual element at the bottom of the parent container. Below the content declaration, I'm going to type display table. Now, the display property uses the value table to display the pseudo element as a block level table. This mimics the HTML table layout model, but with CSS. Now, the table display mode isn't as commonly used by developers as the inline and inline block modes you learned about in the previous section. And you could also read more about this display value in the teacher's notes of this video. Now, the most important part of this clear fix is the clear both declaration. The clear property is directly related to floats, and it's important for controlling the behavior of floats. The value both clears any collapsed space created by floats on both sides of the container. Now, if you're not familiar with some of these CSS properties and values, don't worry. All you really need to know is one key concept. When you apply this clear fix to a non-floating element, like the generated after pseudo element, it moves the element below all floated elements. This movement prevents the container's height from collapsing. So now, whenever you need to clear the floats in a container, you simply add the clearFix class to the element. To fix the collapsed header, I'll simply open up the index.html file and scroll down to the container inside main header and add the class clearFix. Once I save my index file and refresh the page, we can see that the header is no longer collapsed. It now expands to the full height of the floated name and main nav elements.